Josh, what is the connection between SBF and his brother, Gabe Bankman-Fried, and ivermectin? So, Guarding Against Pandemic was a not-for-profit that was founded and it looks like led by Sam Bankman-Fried's brother, Gabe. And this is just a quick overview of the organization. But the point is that this was purportedly, and probably is for all intents and purposes, a not-for-profit to engage in lobbying in DC. But the interesting thing for this one is that these people commissioned a major study, one of the major studies that was used to suggest that ivermectin was not going to be an appropriate treatment for COVID in the early days of the pandemic. Now, whether or not ivermectin is an appropriate treatment, I'm not trying to comment on that. I do not know one way or the other. For those of you who aren't familiar with ivermectin, the main use, as I poorly understand it, is an anti-parasitic, and suppose it's a very effective one. I think it was discovered in the late 70s, thereabouts.
Yeah,
And
it's one of the most widely used drugs ever. It has won a Nobel Peace Prize, and there is really no downside to taking it. It's similar to like a
well, it's a
antibiotic.
downside if you're a parasite, but
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
But anyways, what's interesting about all of this is that one of the things that I find very disturbing, and again, like just to reiterate, this is not trying to purport to be medical advice or anything like that. What I find interesting is the zealotness of the reaction to ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine is another one too, again, an anti-parasitic that was going on there. In fact, I don't have it at my fingertips, but I want to say that there was a Canadian drug founder who one of the main products that his company made was either was ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Again, I can't remember which one it is. I'll have to dig it up. But he died and when I say died, died from a home invasion under, purportedly suspicious terms, but whatever, in the early stages of the pandemic. But what's interesting, it gets back into this web right here, because with FTX, I feel like it's one of those things that on the surface level, you would just kind of scratch your head and say, well, this was a crypto exchange running a Ponzi scheme, and yeah, it blew up. As of course it blew up. Shame on those crypto idiots. And people just, wash their hands, shrug their shoulders, and move on. That might be the surface level. But it's one of these weird things when you keep digging more and more on it, like it doesn't really, and I guess this is true of, all things, or what the mind seeks, the mind finds. And so I'm cognizant of that fact. But when you have the alleged connection, and again, this is completely alleged, I know of no proof to suggest this is going on, that Ukraine was putting funds into FTX or backup. So there's one question mark that goes with this. When the U.S. sends over aid, and assuming the aid they send over is bank reserves or whatever, right, to Ukraine, and then if Ukraine then takes that and funnels part of that back into FTX, and then FTX through SBF donates to the DNC and to the GOP as well, but the DNC receives the majority of the donations. And then those donations are used to influence American politics, namely in this context, the 2022 midterm election. Just kind of like, what the hell's going on? So the point is that on one hand, you could just say, well, people were trying to get a yield or whatever, but there's a darker connection, and that was basically was FTX being used as a way to launder war aid paid for by the taxpayers to use against the taxpayers in their own election in their own election. Again, it's an interesting question mark.
What's the tie into ivermectin?
Yeah, so that's one thing. So that's a completely separate tie. But the other thing is that, again, through Gabe, or SBF's brother, why is it that, Josh, I'm also fond of saying, there's some things that just keep coming up and up and up over and over and over again. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are one of those things. And again, if what you really have from FTX is a fallout to shape the political narrative, to basically put blinders on people to show them what they can or cannot see or whatever, right? If that's the true reason, or one of the true reasons these things existed or whatever, right? Why is there such, I can understand the intrigue about shaping people's political opinions, especially if you're going to get favors, avoid regulation or get regulation passed that you're able to dance around, but your competitors are not. Like, I get the raison d'etre for that. But why extend so much effort to shaping people's perception when it comes to ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, or let's just say ivermectin, in the context of COVID? Like, why even begin with that? And the other thing too is that when you look at the parents of the players involved, there's some very interesting, things that are going on there. That's beyond the scope of this video. But again, you have these very connected people who are very determined. Like, when like Klaus says, we're trying to be green, we're trying to be green, we're trying to be green, or whatever, right? Whatever the green woke narrative is, nonsense. But there's other like versions of Klaus. And I would say, when you have, these not-for-profits, which again, you could argue that's what the WEF is, a not-for-profit. But when you have, these medical not-for-profits trying to advance a medical narrative without even like looking at something, if the purpose of the study seems to be shape perception rather than actually do the study in the first place, that is incredibly suspect because
Justin,
what
do you know where Gabe got his doctorate from?
Stanford? I don't know.
Is he a doctor?
Um,
What is Gabe's connection? Why is his goal trying to just block a certain kind of medicine? It honestly, it doesn't make any rational sense. Would the goal of someone's sole company to just get the limelight out of a medicine through no real scientific process, just saying it's bad and then shilling a different medicine, does that not raise any red flags to begin with? For me, I mean, this is my first time hearing of this as Justin's telling me, but I was just searching the internet and I feasibly could not find if this guy's even a doctor or why he hates
yeah.
ivermectin so much.
Yeah, and what it seems to me. Oh, and by the way, this page right here where it lists Gabe Bakeman-Fried as related to guarding against pandemics, this is no longer on the internet. You have to go to the web archive. I don't know if our viewers can see this, but that's the address right
You
there.
can also
So
go to the web archive if you want to figure out FTX old World Economic Forum partners. That got wiped off the face of the planet, as well as a lot of weird things to do with Alameda's past and some other interviews that Sam has done. Like, why are they blocking these things? There's just so many irregularities in this FTX debacle that just it doesn't make sense. And if something doesn't make sense and you're told not to question it, that is usually there's something under the pile.
Yeah, Josh, so I know I would ask you if you've seen this movie, but one of the running jokes, we have is that, of course, Josh hasn't seen it. Josh, there's an old movie called Chinatown. What else you've seen it, but of course you haven't seen it. But the movie was about the water wars in Los Angeles from, let's say, like circa like 1920, 1930s or whatever, right? And it was set in film noir. And so it wasn't based on a true story, but it had overtones and tie-ins to what really happened, like fictionalized history. Anyways, the point is that there's a running theme of water throughout the movie. And if you understood the connection to water for the plot, you'd have the entire story. Now, again, to be clear, it's not a story about water, but water is like the central arc of all of this. And so the question I would ask is, same thing, is that I'm very curious to understand, like, we've got these arcs running through our current movie. The arc of the refugees, putting pressure on Europe. The arc of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine being vilified. The arc of a cryptocurrency exchange that went bust under suspicious circumstances with extensive tie-ins to establishment politicians, the DNC and the GOP. I don't mean to give those guys a pass either, but my point is that you have tie-ins to all of this. And the only way that I can frame it, as it currently stands, that makes sense, is this is designed to shape public perception. This video is being recorded on November 15th in the afternoon, and the latest news to break was that 2 rockets landed inside Poland. The reports are initially that Russia fired these rockets. Russia, again, as I understand it, denies that they fired it. But the point is that after the U.S. midterm elections and after FTX, which seems to be one of the main conduits for returning campaign contributions to the existing establishment, gets shut down or goes offline, you suddenly have a casus belli. No, it's too strong. You suddenly have a another raison d'etre to say, hey, listen, we need to send more aid and whatnot over to Ukraine based upon this. I think earlier today, Josh, what was it, like a $37.5 billion package got approved? So my point is that if FTX was funneling money back to bad actors in the entrenched establishments here in the States and it went offline, how fortuitous is it that we just suddenly happen to have an escalation in the Ukraine war, purportedly by Russia, that justifies even more aid going over? What a coincidence.
Is where is this money going in Ukraine? Because I don't know how much we spent, but it is, I mean, between the US and Europe combined, it has to be a few $100 billion. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's a lot. What is the entire GDP of Ukraine? I would suspect that it's not too high. I mean, this is a very third world country. You would think that all of these combined governments sending hundreds of billions of dollars over to Ukraine would be causing this mass inflation, hyperinflation. They would be going because there's so many currency units going over there. But I only see a few people in Ukraine that are getting exceptionally rich at the expense of the rest of the people going through these atrocities of war. I'm no journalist by any means, but I do not see any results from Ukrainian people that are actually getting the support from all these other governments sending over billions of dollars.
Again, you get this shaping of the narrative. Like, I do not know what's going on, but nothing about this makes any sense. I mean, here's another example with the more question marks: the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Like, why would Russia blow up their own pipeline? I mean, like, why would they remove their own leverage? Just another example. The more you pick at this, the more questions there are that remain unanswered.
Yeah, so I just found out that Ukraine's doing about $200 billion of GDP a year. And I mean, we're sending over, I mean, nearly that much this year. I mean, what the hell is going on with our inflation? Because if you increase the money supply by 50 to 100%, you would see this drastic inflation if the money is being spread out to where, I mean, everyone's saying it's going. So there's just so many open-ended questions. And how is it possible that some random crypto exchange that goes bust is revealing some oddball Ukraine ivermectin tie-in? There's way too many unknowns out there that just simply do not make sense.
The more answers that you get, precious few that there are, they just lead to more questions. So much like Chinatown, if you understood the connection to water, you'd understand the plot. I'm very curious to understand the connection between the refugees, between existing medications that have been vilified and pillaged in the public, again, most notably ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and probably others as well. Very, very interested to know the connections and the tie-ins between all of this. Because, again, like the water in Chinatown, whenever you have a dead body, surface, it always surfaces in the water. And whenever you have problems over here, it always seems to relate to these things.
We'll see. Those are some things that we want to know. There's one thing that I severely do not want to know. I know there's been quite a bit of activity with Alameda's CEO, this young girl who's been into a lot of LARPs and so live action gameplays and a lot of other things. But I am incredibly uncurious, but have seen way too many scatters around the internet of some other group gameplay that the FTX and Alameda research. Let's just say
team building at the office,
group activities that they do in their alone time. Thank you. We'll see you in the next one.